Voice of the Sea, learning from experts across the ocean. Welcome to Voice of the Sea. In this episode, we're at the Gump research station in French Polynesia on the small island of Moorea. Graduate student Sammy Davis is studying coral reefs and the factors that enable some reefs to recover after stresses like coral bleaching. Corals are the backbone of the reef ecosystem. They provide habitat for fish and other animals to live on, as well as protection from wave action and predators. It turns out that some fish are really important in keeping algae populations under control so that corals can regrow after stressful events. In order to determine which fish are important in maintaining the coral algae balance, Sammy is using special cages that allow algae to grow but prevent fish of certain sizes from eating the algae. She is also using underwater cameras to record the species of fish that eat algae within her study area. So we're going to head off with Sammy Davis out on the boat to check out some of her research that's happening inside the lagoon here at the Gump station in Cook's Bay. Hey Sammy.
Hey guys.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. This is Cook's Bay, and this is where the Gump research station is. So this is where most of the field work that is conducted by UC Santa Barbara, UC Berkeley, and other campuses is here. There's also a French research station in the other bay. This is Cook's Bay, this is Gump Station, and this is the site for all of the research that's happening in the North Shore.
And we're going to stay inside the lagoon today to check out your work.
Yes, so we will be staying in the lagoon. We'll be in the shallow area, which is great because then we can go out quickly and see a lot of things, whereas we don't have to spend too much time getting our dive gear and everything together. So it'll be great. Really close to the station.
And your work inside the bay, I understand, mimics a lot of the research that's also done simultaneously out on the Fore Reef, or the outer part of the reef.
Right. So when we set up an experiment back in 2012, we decided to ask the same question on the Fore Reef as well as in the lagoon. And so we set up an experiment to look at the effect of herbivores, and so specifically fish that eat algae. We wanted to know the effect of these herbivores on the development of the Benthic community, so all of the organisms, including coral and algae, that are growing on the bottom. But what really makes this interesting is that we're thinking about this with respect to a disturbed reef community. So we're trying to understand how herbivores can affect an initial stage Benthic community, so just after a disturbance where there's just a lot of turfing algae. And we also want to know how it can affect a late stage benthic community, so lots of later stage macroalgae.
So a disturbed community would be one that had been affected by like a storm or a disease or something of that nature.
Exactly. A community where a lot of the coral had died, which is actually how things are on the reef out on the Fore Reef and also in the lagoon. So it's a really pertinent question for both habitats, but we had reason to suspect that there would be different kinds of mechanisms and processes going on on the Fore Reef and in the lagoon. So different things happening in both locations. We wanted a location where you could see a lot of parrotfish and surgeonfish and unicornfish and things that we know eat algae. So that was one thing. The second thing, we wanted to make sure that we had substrate that we could attach the cages to. So we drilled in posts and attached cages, which I'll show you. And so we needed a suitable substrate for that. We needed it to be hard substrate, not sand or rubble or anything like that. So that's kind of how we looked for a location. So we're getting kind of close to the site, well, close to where I would need to use the GPS. So it is really close to the research station, which is awesome. But basically, it's in this patch reef up here. So this lighter colored area is the lagoon. And the shallow reef is up here, and it's a lot patchier than on the Fore Reef. So it's really important to kind of start from back here and drive through it slowly. So this is when I'll have to use the GPS.
So are you going to use the GPS to help you avoid patch reefs or to help you locate your site?
Both. So I know where to go into the reef, and I'm using the GPS to help me find the site, but I'm also kind of scanning and looking for anything that seems shallow and kind of hazardous.
So you have a map on your GPS?
Yeah. We've been going here a couple times a year to check things out, but it's been 2 years since this experiment was out. We are pretty much here. So I want to find a good spot to put the anchor down. Basically, I don't want to drop it on my experiment. So that's the first criteria. And then after that, it's basically I look for a sandy spot to drop it.
Exploring Our Fluid Earth is the dynamic curriculum developed by the University of Hawaii's Curriculum Research and Development Group. The award-winning Fluid Earth and Living Ocean textbooks are now interactive and online. New activities, updated content, and a teacher community. Exploring Our Fluid Earth is now freely available. Find out more at exploringourfluidearth.org.
Cozy Island Earth, bringing together university, government, research, and community partners to improve science education and ocean stewardship in Hawaii.
Welcome back. We're comparing Sammy's research in the lagoon with similar research on the outer reef.
This experiment we ran concurrently. We started it on the Fore Reef and on the lagoon, at the same time. And the major focus of this question was to understand how herbivores influence the development and persistence of algal communities, specifically macroalgae on the reef. And so
and macroalgae, that's algae I can see with my naked eye.
Exactly. Macroalgae is the big stuff, and I can point that out to you as we're swimming around, but macroalgae is known to be an issue for coral reefs because it takes up space that corals can't settle in, and so if macroalgae grows on the reef after a disturbance, the coral has a slower recovery process, and in some areas it doesn't actually recover at all. And so there's a lot of reasons for that, but we know that having macroalgae on a reef can really slow down or even inhibit your chances of recovering that reef, the coral. So we really wanted to know how herbivores influence a benthic community. So again, that's the stuff that's growing on the bottom, including the coral, including different types of algae. And what's really interesting and new about this experiment is that we wanted to know how the effect of herbivores, so the effect of these fish eating algae, depended on whether you started with a recently disturbed community, so one that's just turf algae, so the really small stuff that you can't see with your naked eye, or if you started with a fully developed macroalgal community, so the big fleshy algae that can stop coral from settling. So we set this experiment up using different cages with different hole sizes, and the different hole sizes allow different sizes and presumably amounts of fish to enter the cages. And so that's our way of establishing a gradient in herbivore pressure, which we can think of as like visitation or bite rates. So smaller holes, smaller bite rates, fewer bite rates, and then larger holes, greater bite rates, and more herbivore pressure. So we established this gradient with different hole sizes, which I'll show you in these cages. And then inside the cages, we have tiles that started out with either just a very small amount of turfing algae on them, so pretty much resembling that initial post-disturbance community. And then the other tiles in the cages, we started out by attaching, macroalgae to them. And so that was our way of looking at, okay, we manipulated the herbivores, so we want to know what the effect of herbivores are, but we also want to know how this effect changes or depends on what type of algal community you start with. And so this experiment, we started it on the Fore Reef and Lagoon in 2012, and we ended the Fore Reef one in the summer of 2013. So it ran for about a year, and it was pretty clear that herbivores could eat the algae if they were able to access the cage. So the smallest hole sizes basically didn't allow herbivores to access, and those were the cages that had algae in them. For the other ones, pretty much right at an intermediate hole size and above, you didn't get any algae. So the herbivores on the Fore Reef seem to be able to control the algae even if it's small or if it's fully grown kind of macroalgae. So we came in thinking, oh, maybe something similar is going on in the lagoon, but it actually turns out to be really different and really variable. So in the lagoon, it seems like the cages that started out with macroalgae, the macroalgae has remained and persisted in these cages even up to larger hole sizes. So it seems like in the lagoon, the fish may not be as able to control the macroalgae once it's fully developed. for the cages that started out with not a lot of algae in it, so kind of this recently disturbed community, it seems that over time the algae is developing, but herbivores are able to control it at the larger hole sizes. So it seems like there's this difference between the herbivores in the lagoon, their ability to control algae as it's starting to develop, and their ability to kind of graze it down and control it once it's already established. And so that's kind of an interesting thing, because if herbivores aren't able to control it in an initial window and it starts to become established, then that kind of suggests that it might get out of control and you might end up with these sort of macroalgal phase shifts, which are kind of becoming more common in areas around the world like the Caribbean. So that's something that we're looking at here, and it's really interesting to see this experiment in the lagoon and see how it's progressing. So we decided to let it go for another year, and so this is the second year. And so what I'm going to be doing today is kind of getting my first initial look, because I haven't seen it this year. So I want to see what these cages look like, comparing the amount of algae in the different types of cages, so the different hole sizes.
And do you have a hypothesis about why the herbivory within the lagoon it might be different than what's going out on the Fore Reef?
Yeah, we have a couple of ideas and a couple of ways of maybe looking at them. So one thing that happens in the lagoon that doesn't happen on the Fore Reef is a lot of fishing. So the locals here do artisanal fishing, and so they go out and they fish a lot of the herbivores. And they do it by free diving. And so the lagoon is really shallow and you can actually access a lot of these fish, whereas the Fore Reef, most people aren't going to be free diving down to 60 feet to spear a fish. And so there might be differences in the types of fish or the amounts of fish out there because there's a lot of fishing pressure in the lagoon that's not on the Fore Reef. There's also differences potentially in microhabitats. Some fish, the bigger fish that might actually eat macroalgae, might just prefer out on the Fore Reef, which could be because of the fishing or other reasons. So one thing that we're doing, and I will be doing this summer, is trying to get some videotape of who's coming to these cages and who's actually grazing them. So which fish are in the lagoon. And we have video on the Fore Reef and we have fish counts, and we're going to try to see if there's a difference in the not only the grazing pressure, so not only the number of bites, but also the differences in just who's there. So differences in the fish community that might explain some of the differences that we're seeing.
By differences in who's there, you don't mean which fishermen, you mean which fish.
Yeah, sorry, I talk like a fish biologist, so I talk about fish like they're people. So I definitely mean which fish are there. So thinking of how does the fish community differ on the Fore Reef versus the lagoon. And so we're going to try to use videos and assays to try to figure that out.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and put on our wetsuits, get our masks and snorkels, and go overboard and check out your experiment.
Yep,
All right.
good.
I want to ask you real quickly about your gear. We're in Tahiti, and you're wearing a full suit.
I know.
How come?
It looks a little crazy, but the coral cuts out here can be pretty nasty, and a lot of the stuff that I'm doing takes many hours to do, so even if the water's 80 degrees, if you're out there for a couple hours, it can be pretty cold, so I always wear a full suit.
And what about your weight belt?
I use this weight belt so that I can get down to the bottom and stay down there and look at things. If I was just doing the neoprene, I would be floating in the water and not able to get down. So weight belt, full suit, fins, mask, and snorkel.
And then you have some kind of writing slate there?
Yeah, so I've got a slate here, which is really cool. You can bring it down underwater. It has laminated paper, so you can write underwater. And I usually bring slates down here to collect data, and a lot of the stuff I do, I'm underwater taking notes and writing down a lot of the data and collecting, so I'll be doing that today.
Okay.
Awesome.
Let's go take a look.
Let's do it.
University of Hawaii's Sea Grant College program, focused on Hawaii's coasts and its communities through sustainable development, safe seafood supply, sustainable coastal tourism, hazard resilience, and healthy coastal ecosystems. Hawaii's Sea Grant.
You're watching Voice of the Sea. We're back, talking with Sammy about what we saw during our snorkel.
So Sammy, your site is fabulous. I mean, I can really tell the difference between the open cages and the partially open, and the closed was, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
so full of algae.
Yeah, it was not surprising that we'd see differences between, the farthest end, so the open versus a closed. What was really cool is that there's a lot of variation. So not all the opens look the same. Not all of the intermediate hole sizes look the same. Even some of the cages, some of them have a lot more algae in them than others. So that's one of the things that we're really finding about the lagoon is that there's a lot of spatial variability. So, right next to some place that has no macroalgae, you have a spot with macroalgae. And so a lot of what we're going to do now as this project continues is try to understand, maybe what are some of the reasons for that spatial heterogeneity. So why do you see so much differences in just little, what seems like very small spatial scales? So we're going to try to look at the fish that are in these little spots. So I'm going to be counting the fish around each of these little cage locations. And I'm also going to be trying to put out videos because a lot of the fish that eat macroalgae, they're really shy around humans, and that's probably because of the fishermen and because of the fishing pressure. So when we want to try to get an idea of what these fish are doing, it's really hard to do that when there are people in the water. So what we do is put out GoPros and just leave them and come back and see what the fish are doing. So that'll be one of the things that we'll do. We have noticed that there is quite a bit of seasonality as far as the macroalgae, and so there's
really?
part of the year it kind of dies back. So when we come out in the austral summer, so their summer, our winter months, we come out here and the algae kind of can die back a little bit, and then it has a little bit of a boom. So I did notice some differences, and a lot of that due to seasonality, but the general patterns seem to be really similar in that the larger hole sizes have less algae, but again, that spatial variability has been kind of constant. So it's been kind of a constantly variable thing that's persisted even through the seasonality. So that's really interesting.
Certain areas of your study site that have more algae than other areas?
Yeah, so we're kind of noticing that some areas, even with considering that some cages have larger hole sizes than others, even that considering, compared to other locations, there'll be just more macroalgae in general. So like more algae even in the open cages. And so we're trying to understand, maybe those sites don't have as many fish that are coming through and eating. So that's one of the things that we'll try to figure out with videos and surveys and things like that.
So in a lot of your research, you're interested in what's controlling the growth of the macroalgae, because the macroalgae might interfere with corals, and the corals are providing habitat for fish. But there must be some good things about the macroalgae, and how might it be important to the health of the reef ecosystem?
So there's macroalgae that's present even on a healthy reef that's not necessarily disturbed, and the macroalgae it does provide food, it does provide habitat and substrate, and even refuges for other organisms. So organisms can hide within this macroalgae, especially small fish or things like that that might be really vulnerable. If they're seen, they can use this stuff to hide. The major thing that we're noticing is that there's just way more macroalgae than normal, and it seems that there's way more than the fish can control.
I see.
So it's not a matter of it being necessarily good or bad, it's really more of like how much is out there and what are the relative amounts compared to coral and other organisms.
So it's a balance, just like a lot of things in nature.
Exactly. It's similar to kind of understanding what's the ideal or appropriate proportion of each of the types of things. So we're seeing a lot more macroalgae now, not necessarily a bad thing, but if we're looking at it with respect to corals, then it's definitely, there's more macroalgae and less coral right now.
And it's related to these herbivorous fish. So when there's less herbivorous fish, then there's more macroalgae and less habitat for corals.
That's one of the major things that has been found in a lot of reefs around the world, but we're actually noticing a lot having to do with the behavior of the herbivores as well. So relating to fishing behavior, so maybe they're avoiding certain areas because fishermen, that's also a potential way that you can have more macroalgae even with not as a large reduction in fish. But I think more typically it's fishing pressure causing a reduction in either all herbivores or even specific herbivores that are necessary to help the reef recover. That can be really exacerbating the issue. It's hard for me to know at this point what this research could be used for, but I can see that it could be really important in an effort to understand more about which species of fish are important at certain times after disturbance. So at certain times during the succession of the reef community, we might learn that some fish are important for preventing macroalgae establishment, so the fish that are really important in grazing it when it's early stage. And some fish might be more important for grazing it down or eating it when it's already established. So we might learn more about the fish community, which could be used to enact certain management or protection procedures. Depending on the state of the reef, you might choose to protect different species of fish.
Oh, interesting. So it might not be like a one-size-fits-all sort of management plan, but a management plan that needs to be flexible with the changing environment.
Right, exactly.
Thanks for watching Voice of the Sea.
The Curriculum Research and Development Group in the College of Education at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. CRDG's training roots go back over 40 years. Through professional development programs, curriculum workshops, research on teaching methodology, individualized school and district training, and so much more. The Curriculum Research and Development Group, improving schools, improving education. CRDG.
Turn your love of the ocean into a lifelong career. Join NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, as we unlock the secrets in the deep oceans, track rapidly moving storms, model climate trends, protect and preserve our marine resources, and so much more. It's all in a day's work at NOAA. Find a career that makes a world of difference, enriching life through science, service, and stewardship. NOAA.
Healthy oceans are critical to our cultural, economic, and environmental sustainability in Hawaii. The ocean serves as a source of water, food, medicine, jobs, transportation, recreation, and energy. It controls climate and weather. Kosi Island Earth aims to share this ocean awareness by partnering with local scientists and educators to engage communities and schools in active science learning for an ocean-literate population. Kosi Island Earth is working to establish new avenues for connecting research scientists with educators and communities. Kosi Island Earth is enhancing the science and ocean literacy of our island residents and visitors. Kosi Island Earth is connecting scientific research, traditional knowledge, and ocean policy. Kosi Island Earth, bringing together university, government, research, and community partners to improve science education and ocean stewardship in Hawaii.